thank you everyone who's taking time out of their day to join us. My name is Paul Ellingstad. I'm part of the Grow Remote community. And as you've seen from the online promotions, we really felt that there's been a lot of focus recently, particularly during the pandemic, on many of the issues that need to be addressed, from an employee point of view. We feel that, one of the big discussions that really hasn't, been out in the public is on policy, both from an organizational point of view, as well as from a government and a market point of view. So we're delighted to kick off today what will be, 4 sessions, 1 o'clock every Wednesday for the next 4 weeks, specifically talking about the policy issues facing remote working in Ireland and abroad. And we've been very excited to bring in some of the leading experts in the area. So today, kicking off the session, we have Emma Kerrins and John Riordan. I'd like to turn over first to Emma to give a brief introduction, background on the Chamber's point of view on this, and then to John, and then we'll get into the issues. Emma?
Great. Thanks so much, Paul, and thanks for inviting us. Just calling us experts is that's high praise, but I suppose I'm not going to assume everyone who's tuned in knows an awful lot about Chambers and who we are and who we represent. I myself am based in Dublin, originally of the West Coast, but we represent 40 chambers all around the country, and we look primarily at how do you make places good places to do business. And we look at lots of different issues and everything from infrastructure to competitiveness to investment, trade, and Brexit, the whole shebang. How we got into this space or why we started looking at it, we have a workplace and skills task force, and I suppose over the past couple of years in times of quite nearly full employment, you were looking at how do you boost labour participation? How do you make the workplace more inclusive for people that find it harder to stay in the workplace? How do you create more jobs? And that was primarily why we started looking at flexible working, remote working to begin with. It was, you look at female labour participation, you can create jobs in ways that maybe don't fit in to more rigid employment perspectives. Once we started looking at it in more detail, we were looking at it in terms of benefits for regional job creation, reducing congestion, work-life balance, and so forth. So that's sort of the perspective that we're coming at it from. It very much fits in with our ethos in that we align all our policy with the Sustainable Development Goals as well. So remote working, flexible working, or as I'm trying to coin, accommodating work practices so that you get the mix of blended, remote, flexible, full remote, and all of that as well. So that's the position we're coming from on this, and why we're really, really excited to be part of the conversation nationally.
Brilliant. Thanks for that introduction, Emma. And John?
Hi there. My name is John Riordan, and I'm the Director of Support for Shopify here in Ireland. And my interest in this topic has multiple layers. I'll just talk first of all about the Shopify situation. We're probably the biggest pure play remote operation in Ireland. We're over 400 people. We've been here 5 years. We started with 50 people. Like I said, we're at 400 now, and we're continuing to grow. And the company itself, over the past 2 months, has announced that it's globally going digital by default. So all roles in future are going to start out by being remote. And we will continue to have office space, but that's not necessarily offices. It'll be space that we will use to congregate. So we've made that jump significantly as a company. So company overall is 5,500 people, so that's a large group of people around the world. Ireland is the second biggest, let's say, installation or employee group for Shopify outside of Canada. So that's my primary interest from a work perspective. Secondly, I am on the board of Grow Remote, and I've been involved in Grow Remote since right from the start. The first meeting in the first conference down in Tralee about 2 years ago. I agreed to this kind of weird concept. I didn't understand what they were talking about, and I headed off down to Tralee, and somebody said, "Oh no, don't worry, I know the person involved, just trust her, she knows what she's doing." So I headed off down west to Tralee, and I came into the room and I thought, okay, there's something. I didn't know it was going to be an absolute bang up success or a complete flop. And I found out how many people had registered, and then by, I suppose, 20 minutes before we started, we were already at about 2x the number of people who had registered. And that never happens in conferences or summits. So I knew that a raw nerve had been hit. And I knew that Tracy Keogh and the Merry Band of Warriors were people to listen to and lean into. So I've been involved ever since. Third point of interest for me is very clearly in terms of the policy creation. What the Grow Remote operation and the Grow Remote, the way it's organized, what it has taught me is what I call organic interest. I've been involved in a lot of kind of grassroots things over the years, and to try to get politicians and policymakers interested is a challenge in and to itself. What blew me away about Grow Remote is you don't even have to invite those folks. They are glomming all over the topic. They are it's like flies. Everywhere we go, there's a politician that we haven't been engaged with who is knocking on the door looking for sort of a backdoor briefing on the whole concept of working from home and remote work. And that's really unique. And it's something that I think the obligation is on us as leaders in the space to get the best set of observations and the best set of data and represent in as unbiased a fashion the opportunity to the policymakers, and let's call it the mandarins behind the policymakers, so that they have a really good opportunity to create a future that we want to be part of. The next point of interest for me is with the current program for government. It's actually fascinating that we have, two legacy parties and one very new party, or very new to the table party, who are contributing to the policy. So there's a ton of compromise has been made, and almost all the points of compromise are significant catalysts for a lot of aspects of working from home. Anything that touches a reduction in commuting and commute time is a boon to working from home. Anything that pushes more small businesses is equally a boon for small companies working outside of the typical office space and the typical cityscape. So the opportunity that exists right now is magical. Another aspect, just to peel back another layer of the onion, is we are living the dream in Ireland of the most fantastic marketing that's the wrong term, marketing campaign of our generation, which is the Wild Atlantic Way. And the opportunity that we have as leaders in business to cause that not to just be a way to attract tourists and tourist dollars and pounds and punts and whatever other currency you want, but the opportunity to bring folks from cities to rural areas. That opportunity is enormous. So to get the opportunity today to chat with like-minded folks and get a sense as to what people want to see from a policy perspective affords us the opportunity to then lean into, like I said, the policymakers and the background policymakers who are looking to be guided. So the one question that I will throw out to the group for us to discuss at a later stage that I keep getting asked is, what is the best way to provide these folks with a euro value for a job that would have been in the city that's now at home? And is there a way we can actually put a value to it with actual hardcore data behind it that is Irish relevant? Because that is one of the things that's going to unlock the spend in our favor. And when I say in our favor, this to me is a massive green jersey play for all of us. And what I love about the movement in Grow Remote is that very few people wave their company flag. Those people who are waving their company flag and trying to get their company or their organization to the fore kind of get nudged to the side. This is a flat out green jersey play, and every single one of us involved in this is looking to turn around in 2050 and go, I was part of that. And that's more important. And if we all make sure that that's the focus that we have, then this session will be really interesting. And the notes and bullet points that we take from this will be incredibly informative for the policymakers. Okay. That was a bit long-winded, but that's kind of where I'm coming from.
That's great context, great questions, and a great setup. I just want to draw to everyone's attention that there is a Q&A box as we're going through the conversation today. If you have a question, a burning question, even comments, throw them into the Q&A box. I'll try to manage that as we're going through the discussion, and make this more interactive in that space as well. I want to just dial back. There's so much going on. There's an employee or an individual's perspective to remote working. There's employers. There's the community. There's the environmental impact. We've all been thrown in. I think fair to say most people have been thrown in the last 3 months to some form of we'll call it crisis management. Work from home. It's not sort of your standard remote working, but there's now this sense of, wow, companies, individuals that before probably weren't even considering any form of remote working have been thrown into it. So now as we sort of get a little bit of breathing room, things start to open back up. I guess one of the, the big questions is whether you were open to this before, whether you knew a lot about it or a little. What are like the basic building blocks? Where does a company or even an employee need to start? What support do they need from their employer or, from the market, to really make this work effectively instead of being kind of the exception, for remote working. So where does an organization, or where does say the chambers representing a lot of organizations need to start from a policy point of view?
Well, I can maybe touch very briefly on, say, if an employer wanted to start this from the beginning. Often when we are approached by members who are interested in doing this, our first point of call is maybe making the intros to the likes of Grow Remote, who are the best place to advise how you do this well and how you do this in a way that empowers employees and companies, and make sure you're doing things properly. Things we've always been very conscious of is you need to make sure that you have your managers well briefed, that people are leading, that leaders in the company are leading on this. I've always been very concerned about flexi time had a reputation once upon a time as being something part-time people did, or mammies with kids at home, and it ended up being this gender term. What I don't want to see remote and flexible being as something that has a bias that goes with it. So it has to be something that's seen as desirable across the board. So there's ways you can update your policies and ways you can lead within that. What we've been particularly interested in from a policy perspective is we can support employers to design the right policy document to enable your employees to do that. We can encourage you to look at leadership training to make sure you can manage this properly. But it's actually looking at the system, the wider ecosystem business operates in. And in submissions we've made to the Department of Business, to the Department of Justice and Equality, who are actually looking at flexible working policies as well. Firstly, you have to invest in the infrastructure. So you have to invest in skills and training, to invest in broadband if you want to make sure this is equally available all over the country. You also need to educate. So one of the things we've been very excited about from the Programme for Government is how many times remote and flexible working is mentioned. What I'd be concerned about is, what do they mean when they keep mentioning it? What are they going to do? So a national campaign is one thing. A national strategy is even more important. And this is where we look at the review and retrofit. A lot of our employment law legislation, our health and safety legislation, the parameters employers have to currently exist in are quite rigid, and they're designed for a workplace that is the workplace of the past, where people worked defined shifts with defined rest breaks in fixed locations. Locationless is, or a blend of location and remote, or a blend of remote working from home and on-site, is the future. And it's where we can really get so much of the benefits of all of the things John has talked about, the ideals we have in terms of the opportunities we see. How do you make employment law and health and safety law fit for purpose in a way that enables remote and flexible working? While not risking over-regulating it as well, which takes away from the flexibility and the beauty of being able to kind of just log on and do your job as you would normally do in a way that suits you and suits your employer and that. So in terms of what we do to support employers, it's talking them through that it's nothing to be afraid of, but you do need to update your policies, you need to train your leaders, and you need to be very clear on, where everyone stands. But more broadly, we just see the system needs a refresh. So we think the Programme for Government and the next government, there's a huge opportunity to do this really well. But so long as everyone knows what we mean by enabling remote working to flourish, and that's by looking at all of the systems you've currently designed for a workplace that maybe is the workplace of the past, and making sure that that can move on.
Emma, can I just jump in on that one there? There's a mindset challenge here that we need to really address. And I'm going to ask everybody to think of January and February, and imagine the amount of column inches that were spent in talking about remote work and the need for broadband, and also a lot of the conversations that I was involved in the last 6 months. A lot of folks talking with, health and safety people talking about the challenges. We can't do this. And IT departments of various companies were the typical, IT and health and safety were the typical roadblocks. Oh, we can't do this, we can't do that. Suddenly, March, whatever, 12th or whatever the date is, happens. We jump the fence, we're over the other side. None of those conversations, if you go and have a look at the conversations that we were having with that companies like myself, people in roles like myself in companies like Shopify were having with folks who were looking to do this space. There was no health and safety discussions. There were no really IT security issues. It was go ahead and do this. All right. So what this has caused is an almost elimination of what were the typical easy barriers that companies were either using or various departments were using to create a bit of a speed bump. Another one from a personal perspective, and I know I'll cop a lot of flack for this, is on the broadband side. If you look at the column inches on broadband March 12th and post March 12th, it's amazing how many people ended up working from home after March 12th who I wouldn't say we're saying that there were challenges with the broadband. What I'm saying is people were resourceful and they found ways around it. Now, it's not perfect. Please don't, I know there are people who have had to go to their mother's house, their brother's house, they've had to go elsewhere to get broadband. But what it's shown us is that we have the resourcefulness and the capabilities to be able to do it. What we now need to do is to sensibly roll out a level of broadband that enables us to work. Like this afternoon, or last week and this week, and for the next couple of weeks, I'm working out on Mizzen Head. It's about as remote as you're going to get in Ireland. And I'm working with a standard Huawei dongle, 4G dongle. And I've been able to participate in conference calls all around the world. I've been able to download and upload video files and send and receive stuff. So it can be done on a 4G network. Okay. And I think there's an aspect of cans rather than can'ts, and we're a bag of cans rather than a bag of can'ts, and we need to understand that. So let's focus on the stuff we can do, not focus and not allow people to focus on the things that we can't do. So that to me that's where I'm going to go back to the point I made. This is a mindset change, and we need all of the employers, our prospective employers or putative work from home employers, to think about the things that they can do and don't get wrapped around the axle on the small things and small challenges that they have to get past.
John, I want to pick up on that and take that back to something that Emma said about, having to readjust or, develop new employment law, health and safety law, for a new mode of working instead of the traditional, go into the office or the physical environment. Companies like Shopify clearly aren't just waiting for everything to be perfect or kind of up to code. You're going ahead and making those adaptations. What advice would either of you have to companies that, because of the pandemic, have seen that this is working? Probably some of the, the questions or the uncertainties about, trust and productivity, have been answered. They now want to go ahead, but yet they might be getting, stuck on that. Well, we need to adjust policies. We need to, wait for laws to change. What can they do pragmatically without creating risk, legally or otherwise, to their organization, to their employees? How can they make this, this progression quicker as some of these, laws and regulations change?
Can I jump in on that one before Emma there? Because I'll just give you two things on how we've approached it at Shopify. One of them is on the technical side, and the other is on the mindset side. Yeah. So from a technical perspective, if we had done an assessment, we wouldn't have rolled out anywhere near as successfully. What we did is we decided this is a good place to be, and we're going to attract people who are in areas where they have the broadband to do it. Okay, and we required that each of the individuals provided their own broadband, not a company provided broadband. So what that meant is similar. I'll give you an example. When companies come into Ireland to hire employees, do they send a chauffeur-driven car out to somebody every day to bring them in a commute to work? No, they don't. In the same way, a company shouldn't be focused on actually providing broadband for somebody. If somebody is providing their own broadband, guess what? They are then required to have a plan B and a plan C, and there's a level of responsibility and accountability. And what we've found is that by asking people to be accountable for essentially their mode of transportation to the office, I'm using that term, but they're responsible for their ability to have broadband and to engage. People always have that plan B and plan C in mind because it's their lifeblood. It's like not having a car. Like employees around the country don't put their hands up and say, "Oh, I can't work today. Car doesn't work, and you've got to come and fix the car." It doesn't work that way. So we've got to understand that. The second one is from pardon me, there's a dog barking in the background, so apologies for that. The other aspect is on, I've forgotten the point. Emma, I'll come back to you. You chime in.
Yeah, I'll jump in, and I suppose what I'm kind of pondering, John, as you're talking, is this whole culture of the can, like this philosophy of businesses you just want to do it. And definitely feedback we've been having kind of broadly is, from companies who are half pondering, could we do a flexible work policy and core hours and remote and enable this and enable that? They were doing a lot of pondering, and then COVID has happened, and now they're seeing that they can do it. Now, I often think to statistics that Tracy will quote, which kind of aligns up with some of feedback we've been getting from members through some of our surveys, is about a third of people this doesn't suit, a third want a mix, and a third are very, very happy if this suits them. They're the sort of personality that they can manage their workday in whatever location they are in the world, and don't need that socializing part of the workplace quite as much. Because of the nature of our organisation and in terms of leading our members on where we think there's huge opportunities, and we really believe that there's a lot of opportunities in seeing more flexible and remote workplaces, or more employers kind of engage with flexible and remote. A lot of our members are smaller businesses as well, that have a different mindset, and it's not that they don't have the mindset of can, but they're maybe slightly more conservative in kind of the risk because they're smaller. And one of the questions that we got a lot over the past year, and it was probably aligned with what was in the news, so it's what was on people's mind, is insurance. So if I can't absolutely be 100% sure what's going on in my employee's home, where do I stand with insurance? And this is sort of where the hub strategy that the Western Development Commission are looking at, and that the Department of Business have been very engaged with, makes an awful lot of sense, because what you're doing is you're enabling, you're almost creating micro workplaces within towns and village centres all over the country that allows all sorts of companies to house their staff depending on what suits them, whether it be part-time or full-time. And so that's a sort of investment piece that kind of works quite well. But I do think if we want to drive a wider cultural change, rather than allow kind of the culture of the can and the companies who are sort of fearless and passionate about this driving ahead, and the companies who are a little bit more cautious and not quite sure, we risk a bit of a two-tier, which is where I think the policy stuff is so important, and where the mandarins and the government is so important, in that if you are supportive of this, this is what you need to do to make sure that you're levelling the playing field. For those who have doubts, or those who don't maybe have the leaders that are as passionate about it to get it across the board, and maybe need a little bit more guidance on that. And that's sort of where we're trying to not necessarily play devil's advocate, but at least advocate for the kind of voices that are a little bit unsure, and how do you get them on board. So when we get the insurance questions and that kind of thing, it's like, well, you can offer remote and flexible working. That doesn't necessarily mean all of your staff have to be working from their living room. And that would solve that question in terms of how that would work. But if you want to solve that more widely, there's lots of examples we can look at in other jurisdictions comparatively as to maybe how obligations and burdens are moved around a little bit, and maybe how you could update how employment law works so that there's a little bit more balance and it's a little bit of a better fit for the workplace of the current and of the future as well. But like, culture is so important, and believing that you just can get on with it and do it and there's nothing to be afraid of, like, is key. And I think what COVID-19, if there's not a lot of opportunities coming out of what's been happening to the economy over the past few months, but there are some, and this is one of them. One thing I might caution in terms of the policy piece as well, and we've got a lot of feedback on this too, is that I would be hoping that policymakers don't see remote and flexible working as sort of a panacea or replacement for the need for investment into things like childcare. And the workplace will still be the workplace. How everyone has been working, I mean everyone, like in terms of this, anyone who can work from home has been working for the past few months. It's been far from ideal. I think productivity in a measurable way has probably gone through the roof, but possibly in a damaging way, because everyone has been working all around the clock, trying to homeschool kids, find families, deal with life, and that goes on. That's not sustainable in the long term. So we need to make sure that with a policy or a strategy or a campaign that sort of promotes remote and flexible working, that goes hand in hand with the kind of state our government needs to invest in terms of offering affordable quality childcare and those sort of options. And like, it could be aligned with the hubs. I was on a webinar with Rural Link a couple of weeks ago, and it was something I kind of tried to weave in the questions was, could there be an opportunity where you could align hubs and childcare provision side by side in town centres, and that could be part of the solution as well. So we just need to make sure that we're linking in what the workforce needs as well as what some parts of the workforce really want as well.
I'm glad you raised that one as well, Emma. It's not surprising that, as there's been talk of, opening up and back to the office, but still uncertainty on childcare, all of the parents that are, trying to multitask here, with work from home and childcare are still very much in alert of what they're going to do. So it's got to be looked at as a system. John, you were going to jump in there?
No.
Okay.
Nope. Okay.
Guys, I'm just going to throw out, there's a couple questions coming in, so see if these are of interest to you. Yeah, a little bit different, two different angles on this. The first real intriguing perspective on this is remote working for rural Ireland, today's IFSC opportunity for special economic zones. Policy can deliver this. The second question, how do you feel government initiatives like Healthy Ireland can support and be leveraged to support remote working policies regarding the positive health impacts of remote working on people's health and also on the community well-being? So sort of two different approaches. Care to take a stab at either of those?
Yeah, I'll just jump in. The IFSC is kind of an interesting one, because I was coming out of college around the time the IFSC was being floated. And it was almost a panacea that was going to cure everything, and it doesn't. No, there is really no panacea. But I do like the approach, which is, if we have a strong, which we had at the time, we had a strong policy in place that was going to attract certain types of businesses and industries, and it worked, and it really did work from an IFSC perspective. But I think what's more important is the mushroom cloud that came with it, which was all of the ancillary businesses and the amount of fintech companies then that built up around that. That's the really attractive part. So I think what we need to encourage as best we can, we need to encourage the policymakers that all of these rural hubs, and exactly what Emma was just saying, you're tacking on stuff there because it'll bind the childcare facilities in town X. It will also keep one or two coffee shops in the area going. It will keep the grocery store in the town going. It's the difference between an extra teacher in the school. It's the difference between being able to field an intermediate football team in the championship that year. It's the post office staying open. And all we're looking for in each of these towns is a handful of other people. So let's step back. What are the things that we need to see done? From a medium to long-term perspective, and I think back to the IFSC, there was talk about the IFSC when I was in, I think it was like 4th, 5th, 6th year in school. So a ton of us kind of all gravitated towards finance type roles. What I would like to see is is a normalization of discussions about working from home. Working from home is actually a skill and a talent, and it's something that we should promote as a professional way for people to enter the workforce, so that you have your kids in everywhere from Skibbereen to Sligo who look upon work as something I can do in my hometown. I don't need to go to Cork, Dublin, Galway, Limerick. I can stay in my hometown, and it is a very professional work environment, and I am working for a large company. It doesn't have to be a multinational. It can be a large indigenous company. It can be a small startup in your hometown. But working from a home environment, or working from let's call it a local hub, because to me, that's working from my homeland rather than working from home. All right, that is what we need to normalize. So to me, it's a normalization and a professionalization of this aspect, which is working from home.
Yeah, and John, I might just kind of dovetail just at the end of that with kind of outside of the remote working policies that we look at in Chambers Ireland. We're very much all about reviving town centres. My kind of take on town centres, you can talk about commercial rates and how you reduce vacancies till the cows come home. The easiest way of reviving town centres is ensuring people are back living in or near towns. If people are working, they're spending. If they're spending, there's businesses, and then you have much fewer vacancies and much more thriving economies. In Chambers Ireland and in the Chamber network, there's always an awful lot of discussion about how do you attract investment. Back to the IFSC piece, how do you bring in the IDA to create jobs in these towns? With remote working, it's like we can now bring IDA salaries back to these towns. You might not bring the whole plant with them, but you can bring those very professional, high-paid, high-skilled salaries back, which helps the economy. And all you need is a few people, and there's an added value to towns and parts of the country which maybe struggle to create jobs. On the IFSC piece and special economic zone piece, what I would say on that is another side piece that supported that job creation in the 90s through the IFSC and all that was education as well. If we want to ensure that we continue to create high value jobs in Ireland, which can be locationless and can be throughout the country, we need to make sure we're continuing to invest in education. We need to make sure that we're using the National Training Fund properly, that higher level is properly funded, so that graduates are coming out now, not only see the opportunities, but have the right skills for the opportunities that the global market needs, so that they can live and work in Ireland, wherever they like. But the skills piece and the education piece has to go hand in hand with that as well. If that falls off a cliff, and that doesn't get the right attention as well, then we won't have the quality of graduates we'll need who can fill these jobs and work remotely as well. Just on the Healthy Ireland piece as well, I think there's kind of two sides to that. One, let's talk to Healthy Ireland in the campaign and maybe look at how you would help them kind of vocalise that well-being piece of being able to live in Sligo or live in West Clare or West Cork and work in a job that maybe used to have to be in a city centre or in Dublin. But then there's the other side as well, in the well-being piece of remote working. And there's always globally a lot of conversation these days as well about digital burnout, and making sure that you're training people and supporting people to understand that self-care piece as well, and making sure employers are taking responsibility as well, and checking in with people and making sure that people are okay. So there's two sides to that. It can actually help people who are working remote be conscious of their well-being, and then also promote the really positive work-life balance side of being able to choose your favorite place to live and your job goes with you, as opposed to having to choose a place where you can find a job.
Brilliant, thanks, Emma. I want to hit this question. It's kind of it's becoming, I think, more of an elephant in the room about tax relief. Now, so we've gone through COVID. There's been talk of special dispensation or tax tax relief from the government. Either from an employer point of view or from an employee point of view, any thoughts or comments on where does this come into the equation right now? Is it a critical factor? Do we need it? Do we need the tax relief as an incentive to accelerate remote working, or is this kind of another perk? So how critical is it of an issue, in your minds, to your organizations?
I think it's important that there is a proper tax treatment and there's a proper write-off facility for people who are working from home. So this cannot be fully favorable to so I'm going to peel back for a second. A typical global company would be spending, that would have headquarters in a large city and then multiple operations around the world, are typically spending between $15,000 and $20,000 a year per person in terms of real estate. So anything that they can do to peel back that cost and put it back on the bottom line is a really good thing from a profitability perspective. But it can't all be burdensome on the actual the employee. Can't take all that cost on board. So there's got to be some sort of tax relief for me to use my home, my light, my heat, my rent, my rate, whatever else. There's got to be some sort of relief. And what we have right now in Ireland is this e-workers allowance, which is €3.20 a day, which what's the best way to say it? You know, it's quite cumbersome and laborious to actually apply for it. You have to provide a whole series of bills to show that you've had this expense, and then each of the employees. So I'm going to give you an example. Think about it from a company that has 400 remote employees. Now, we don't have an office, so therefore, by default, all the employees are remote. So in the perfect world, we should be able to apply on behalf of all those employees warrants that they're working remote, and then this applies as a tax credit. Boom, there you go. No paperwork, no cumbersome, laborious process for any government department. It should be a dead easy thing to do. But no, 400 people have to individually apply and have a ton of receipts to go off and get the money and fight for it. That's just nonsensical. It really is nonsensical. And we've got to get to a point where the tax incentives that are in place are actually driving good behavior and driving correct behavior. They're encouraging people to work remote. So I have never heard of a single remote worker tell me, in the 5 years that I've been heavily involved in this in Ireland, and probably 20 years elsewhere, I've never heard anybody in Ireland mention the €3.20 as any way a building block in terms of their decisions to go remote. There is a ton of opportunity for us to do something to drive an incentive in play. Anybody who's worked in the US will know the ability to, there's a much greater ability in the tax code in the US to write off expenses against income. We don't like, the culture of entrepreneurship in Ireland is quite sullied by many, many years of self-employed folks getting whacked in various governments, in various budgets, and not getting the same tax treatment as PAYE. There needs to be a flip around it. There's a reason why in Ireland we don't have as great an innovation culture as other countries, because the tax treatment doesn't actually afford that. So we need proper tax treatment that will encourage people, that will actually encourage both people and companies to have their workers not come to an office, which negates the need to have an office, which actually takes cost off the books, which actually drives profitability, which creates the momentum and creates the wheel for profit. It's an essential point. Sorry, Emma, you were going to chime in there?
Yeah, no, I was just going to chime in. Firstly, just say that I'm not a tax expert, and if I were to design something, I'm not sure it would be what you would want. So what I find really useful here is to hear what would actually be useful. But I do have observations, and I suppose from our experience in kind of working with and speaking to Department of Finance around tax treatment of self-employed and entrepreneurs, and why can't we do like what they do in the US or in Germany or in other places to support entrepreneurship. And typically, maybe it's over for reasons generations back or the last generation, there is a conservative approach to creating new tax incentives and new tax reliefs. And they announced something, say even like the KEEP scheme, for example, which was about kind of shares for employees, employee share ownership schemes. It's quite rigid, doesn't work perfectly the first year, and they tweak and tweak and tweak. And to be honest, a lot of people just get fed up and don't apply for it anymore. And it's quite a conservative approach to taxation, tax relief. I'm seeing a few points coming in through the chat there. And I think it's when you attach a tax incentive or a tax relief to something else. So Department of Communications and Climate Action, Minister Breeden, talks about remote working a lot as a way of reducing congestion. So if it's a tax relief or an incentive to achieve another aim, and you can tie them together, Department of Finance tend to look at it in a slightly different way then. So I think if you can demonstrate there's a saving here, whether it be in emissions or fines to Europe because of carbon tax and things like that, and you can reduce congestion and the kind of pressure on transport because people are working remotely and working from home, then you can kind of see the cost benefit and make your case. But I'm really interested to know what people who are doing a lot of remote working now feel needs to change, because a lot of these reliefs were designed a while back. I mean, I'm not, how long is the e-working allowance around? It's probably quite some time, and I don't know that it's been refreshed or the expenses have been refreshed in a bit. Like that belongs to a different era. So we need a fresh look at that. You know, who decided it was 320? Why is it that amount, and what is that linked to now in terms of cost of living and so forth? So we absolutely need to look at it again and make sure it's fit for purpose, but you can also do it to incentivize behavior. And I think tying it to something, whether it's about creating regional employment or if it's about reducing carbon footprint, I think is a really good way to sell the need to do it so that it's done properly. But really, like what needs to happen is there any kind of ideas, proposals coming in from the attendees? Like what does the new Minister for Finance need to hear about this right away so it actually enables the wider strategy that the Programme for Government has spoken about so many times within, is it a 128-page document? It's mentioned about a dozen times, I think. So what will enable that?
I'm just seeing there's a number of questions and statements on this, and what I'm thinking is, as part of the follow-up on here, you know, people that have additional questions, we have a shared Google Doc, you know, that people can contribute to, and I'm thinking for maybe our third or our fourth sessions, you know, in 3 or 4 weeks' time, you know, we'll look to have a you know, a specific you know, accounting, a tax perspective on this, both from an employer as well as from an employee point of view. This seems to be a real hot button that we're uncovering here. So listen, I'm conscious of the time, and we really do. We want to respect people's time. We're trying to keep these sessions to 45 minutes, but again, you know, through these Google Share Docs and that, you know, we'll continue on the discussion. We're nearly at time now. I just want to take you know, a couple minutes just to give John and Emma, you know, just some concluding statements, you know, from what you've seen in the questions today, takeaways, or even a question that you have, you know, really burning question, you know, on behalf of your organization or your part, you know, what's kind of the next step? What, you know, what's the next step in policy that you think we need to address, you know, sort of collectively, you know, as a movement?
Go for it.
Brand, so I suppose my sum up would be, if the next government are really serious about this, let's make sure that conversation happens in the first 100 days so that a national strategy is pulled together. But let's make sure that in that national strategy, you're enabling leaders and companies who are doing this already to do it even more, and companies who are unsure, so that those reservations are dealt with. That would be my message to, I don't know, maybe there's somebody even in the group that or who's tuned in who might be members of one of those parties. That is really important that we get that right, because what we don't want is a two-tier economy where the kind of more tech-savvy, you know, visionary companies are doing this well and creating the jobs, and everyone else is getting left behind and struggling to fill skills. So let's just remove the obstacles and make sure that we're taking this seriously from the get-go.
What I'd like to see, Paul, is I'd like to see an actual work from home strategy document, a national work from home strategy document from the next government. I'll come into that. I'll get into that in a second. The second thing I'd like to see, and Western Development and a ton of other folks have said this as well. So regarding the commercializing the Wild Atlantic Way, it's been such an incredible asset to us, and I think we need to really attach a lot of business savvy to that and actually bring more and more people to the west coast of the country. I think it's a phenomenal opportunity. And then the third one, which I've bleated on about already, which is meaningful tax breaks. So on the first one, from a national work from home strategy. To me, there's a telling point here, which is that there is no one group within the IDA. The IDA itself, fantastic organization. They've brought so much business into Ireland. They're still regionalized. Okay, and I'd love to see a definitive non-regional group within the IDA that's focused on bringing businesses into Ireland that are location agnostic. Now, the IDA, they're very subtle and simple changes that they're making to do that. But what I'd love to see is an actual proper breakup and reconstitution of the regionalization of the IDA, so that there is a really strong group, powerful group that is focused on companies that are location agnostic. And I think that's probably a very important point. The other one I want to make is go back to the point of education again. I think we're missing an opportunity with transition year to encourage and incorporate some aspect of remote work, or something to do with institutionalizing and remote work as a okay, the meeting's now being recorded again. Thank you. I think we all heard that. There's an opportunity for there to be a proper tax incentive for the company that are doing it, and also a proper tax incentive for the employee.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's got to be meaningful, and it's got to be balanced, and it's got to be something that we don't take the piss out of. Now, I'm not a tax expert. Don't ever ask me to create policy. I can just kind of, throw hand grenades in from a distance. This is where rational, clever, thoughtful policymakers come into their own. But what I'm looking for is a balance of something for the company, something for the employees, knowing that the country as a whole is going to benefit enormously. If we take the 100,000 people that are commuting into Dublin every day, who are bringing their laptop and their phone into the office to use their laptop and their phone, right? It is so dumb and nonsensical that if we were to take 15 to 20,000 people who are doing that out every day, it would free up a huge amount of space on the roads. It would free up office space. It would free up a ton of stuff, which would give the IDA an even bigger incentive to drive more of the large businesses back into Ireland, bring them into Ireland, and then encourage them to move west. That's what I'd like to see done.
Brilliant. John, Emma, all of the participants joining our call today, thank you so much. I think we've really kicked off this conversation. We're doing it publicly, to make it open and available for others to join in the conversation as well. This isn't just rhetoric. This isn't just about, a campaign. This is really, changing how we work, how we live, and it takes the voices and the expertise and the motivation from everyone involved. So thanks so much. Next week, we're back, same time, same place. We have join us then. And again, thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having us. Bye-bye. Thanks, Mary. Bye-bye.